I start every morning the same way. I wake up at 6 a.m. without an alarm clock, a habit left over from my working days. I take my blood pressure pills with oatmeal and look out the window at the yard next door, where Mrs. Renwick is walking her pug. Canyon Lake wakes up slowly, especially in my neighborhood, where mostly retirees like me live. My name is Violet Thorpe, and I am 77 years old. 15 of those years I have lived alone in the house that Hugh, my late husband, and I bought 32 years ago. It's a two-story house on Cypress Street with 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a small garden where I grow roses and petunias. Too big for a lonely old lady, as my son Lance says, but I never considered myself an old lady. I still don't, although my joints and back sometimes disagree with me. Canyon Lake wasn't always so quiet. When we first moved here, the town was booming. New businesses were opening, homes were being built, young families were arriving. I got a job as a bookkeeper for Pine River Construction, the largest construction company in the county. I worked there for 32 years until I retired. Hugh was an electrical engineer at the local power plant. We lived modestly but comfortably and always saved for a rainy day. Our son Lance was a late baby. Hugh and I hadn't been able to conceive for a long time, and when I turned 40, the doctor said there was almost no chance. But a miracle happened. Lance was born a healthy, strong boy, and we loved him dearly. Maybe a little too much. Looking back now, I realize we spoiled him. After high school, Lance went to California to study, got a degree in software engineering, and stayed there to work. That's where he met Nina. They came to introduce her to us when they decided to get married. Hugh was already ill at the time. He had been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. He died 2 months after they were married. Those first years after Hugh's death were the hardest of my life. The house was suddenly empty and cold. I continued to work, but spent my evenings in a daze in front of the TV. Lance called every Sunday, asking how I was doing, but the conversations grew shorter and shorter. He and Nina had a son, my grandson Ethan, whom I'd only seen 4 times in the 10 years he'd been alive. 5 years ago, I retired. I thought that now I would be able to see my son's family more often, maybe even help with my grandson. But California was farther away than I thought. Not geographically, emotionally. "Mom, we really can't come right now," Lance said into the phone. "Nina's trying to get a promotion, I'm working on a new project, and Ethan has a swimming competition. How about Thanksgiving?" Thanksgiving turned into Christmas. Christmas turned into summer vacation, and so on in a circle. They ended up coming once a year, 2 at the most, and never for more than 2 days. I tried to make things work. I cooked their favorite meals, asked about their lives, asked about Ethan's progress. I sent gifts for all the holidays. I called, I emailed, but things weren't working out between us. Last year, I decided to have a big family dinner for my 76th birthday. I ordered a cake from the best pastry shop in town, made roast duck with oranges, a specialty that Hugh loved so much. I invited not only Lance and his family, but also my few friends, Miriam and her husband, and Bertram, the widower we'd met at the garden club. "Is it really necessary to invite outsiders?" Lance asked over the phone. "We see each other so infrequently. I'd like to spend time as a family." I canceled invitations to friends, even though it was awkward. On my birthday, I set the table in the dining room, put on my best dress, and waited. They were 2 hours late. Ethan went straight to his room to play some electronic game. Nina was barely off the phone answering work messages. Lance was the only one who tried to keep the conversation going, but it was mostly about the house. Was the roof leaking? Was the foundation okay? I should check the wiring, it's old. After dinner, as I was cutting the cake, Lance suddenly said, "Mom, Nina and I think you should consider a nursing home. Sunset Manor isn't far from here, and they have good reviews." I almost dropped the knife. "But why? I'm doing just fine on my own." "You're not getting any younger, Mom. What if you fall, or there's a fire? Who's going to help you?" "I have neighbors, friends." "It's not the same as professional care," Nina intervened, getting off the phone. "Besides, the house is too big for one person. It costs money that could be spent on quality care." I didn't argue. After all, in some ways they were right. The house did need care. But the thought of moving into a sterile room at Sunset Manor with a communal dining room and the smell of medicine was almost physically repulsive to me. The next morning before they left, I noticed Lance walking around the house, inspecting the walls, the ceilings, the water pipes. He was taking pictures on his phone and writing something down. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Figuring out how much it's going to cost to fix it up when we sell the house," he said as casually as if he were talking about the weather. "Sell the house?" My voice shook. But I wasn't going to sell it. Lance looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mixture of annoyance and pity. "Mom, we talked about this yesterday. Sunset Manor, remember? Selling the house would cover your living there for years to come." "I said I'd think about it," I said firmly. "But there's no decision yet." He shrugged and continued his rounds as if my words meant nothing. After they left, I took my blood pressure, 160/95, way above normal. A headache throbbed in my temples. I took a double dose of medication and lay down, trying to calm down. It had become a pattern. Every time after their visits or even long phone conversations, my blood pressure would spike and migraines would start. The doctor said that at my age I needed to avoid stress, but how could I avoid dealing with my own family? 3 months ago, they came for a weekend visit. Lance brought up the nursing home again, but this time approached it from a different angle. "Mom, Nina and I thought we could help you out financially. You could sign the house over to us and we could pay for you to stay at Sunset Manor." "So you want me to give you the house while I'm still alive?" I couldn't believe my ears. "It's just a matter of practicality," Nina interjected. "It'll be less legal trouble later, and less taxes." I looked at them, my son, whom I'd given birth to at 40, when I'd given up hope of motherhood, and his wife, whom he'd met in California. They looked like strangers. Lance had inherited Hugh's tall stature and broad shoulders, but had lost his kindness and patience somewhere along the way. Nina was an attractive woman with impeccable makeup and a way of speaking as if her every word had been checked on a scale and found weighty enough to be spoken aloud. "I'll think about it," I said then. And I did think. I lay awake nights wondering when things had gone wrong. Had I been too distant since Hugh's death? Or was it the distance? Or was it Nina who always looked at me as a burden? I didn't know. All I knew was that after each of their visits, I felt devastated and sick. In April, I tried again. I called Lance and asked him to come to California for a week. I wanted to see how they lived, spend time with their grandson, maybe get to know Nina better. "It's not a good time, Mom," Lance replied. "Ethan has exams, Nina is working on an important project, and I just don't have the opportunity to take a vacation right now." "I could stay at a hotel," I suggested. "You don't have to take a vacation, I just want to see you. Let's revisit this conversation in the summer, okay?" In the summer, they found a reason again, and then another one, and another. 2 weeks ago, they had an unexpected visit in the middle of the week. Lance called in the morning and said they'd be here by lunch. I rejoiced. Maybe something had changed. Maybe they'd realized how important family ties were. I made lunch, baked apple pie, Ethan's favorite dessert. But when they arrived, Ethan wasn't with them. "He's at summer camp," Nina explained. "A very prestigious one. Only gifted kids are accepted." At dinner, they talked about the house again. This time the plan was even more straightforward. "Mom, we found you a great apartment near Sunset Manor," Lance said. "It's a one-bedroom, but it's very bright, and it has 24-hour medical care." "I don't need 24-hour medical care," I objected. "Not yet," Nina smiled her rehearsed smile. "But it's better to be prepared than to fuss later." After lunch, they asked me to show them the attic. I struggled up the steep stairs. My knees weren't what they used to be. Lance and Nina looked at the attic, exchanging glances. "There's a lot of junk in here," Nina said. "We'll have to move it all out." "It's not junk," I objected. "It's my stuff and Hugh's. Photo albums, books, his stamp collection." "Mom," Lance put his hand on my shoulder, "you're going to have to get rid of it sooner or later. It's better to do it now, while you can decide what you want to keep and what you want to throw away." I didn't say anything. Something inside me snapped. They were already dividing up my possessions, planning my life as if I were an old couch that needed to go somewhere. That evening, when they drove back to the hotel, they refused to stay with me, citing a prepaid room. I took my blood pressure 180/100. My head was splitting so bad I could barely see. I took my medication and lay down, but I couldn't sleep. All night, I thought about how my own children saw me only as a burden and a source of inheritance. And with each thought, the pain got worse, and my blood pressure, which I checked every hour, didn't go down, despite the pills. In the morning, I called Miriam and asked her to take me to the doctor. Dr. Reed, who had been seeing me for the past 20 years, was concerned. Violet, this blood pressure is life-threatening. What caused the spike? I told him about my son and daughter-in-law's visit, their plans for my home, and my constant attempts to mend relationships. Dr. Reed took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Listen to me carefully, Violet. At your age and with your history of hypertension, constant stress can lead to a stroke or heart attack. You need to avoid situations that trigger that reaction. Are you suggesting I avoid my own children? I grinned bitterly. I'm suggesting you put your health first, he replied seriously. Sometimes toxic relationships can literally kill, even if it's a relationship with family. All the way home, I was silent as Miriam talked about her grandchildren who visit her every weekend. I looked out the window at the Canyon Lake houses floating by and thought that maybe Dr. Reed was right. Maybe it's time to put myself first, even if it means breaking up with the only family I have left. After my visit with Dr. Reed, I became more mindful of my health. I switched to a low-salt diet, as he advised, and added daily walks in the neighborhood to my routine. My blood pressure stabilized a little, although it was still above normal. The headaches were less intense, but not completely gone. Lance had called twice this week, unusually often for him. The first time, the conversation was short and perfunctory. He asked about my health, about the house, if any repairs were needed. The second time, he informed me that he and Nina were going to come to Canyon Lake again next weekend. There's some paperwork to discuss, he said vaguely. And we want to show you that condo we talked about. I didn't argue. After talking to Dr. Reed, I felt strangely calm, almost detached, like I was looking at my life from the outside. Friday morning, the day before they arrived, I met Bertram at the local supermarket. We'd met at a gardening club 3 years ago. He was the only man among 24 women. He was widowed like me, but much later. His wife died of breast cancer just 4 years ago. Bertram was a tall, trim man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and clear blue eyes. A former lawyer, he had retired, but continued to counsel some old clients. Violet, he waved at me when he spotted me by the cereal shelf. How's your health? Miriam tells me you've been to the doctor. Nothing out of the ordinary, I tried to smile. It's just an age thing. I hear your son is coming? Bertram picked up a packet of oatmeal from the shelf. Yes, tomorrow, with his wife. You don't seem particularly excited. I sighed. Bertram had always been observant. Our relationship? Complicated. I understand, he nodded. My son moved to Australia 15 years ago. We see each other every 2 or 3 years. We call each other on holidays. Sometimes I feel like we're almost strangers. We continued our conversation over a cup of tea in the supermarket cafe. I don't know why, but I told Bertram about Lance and Nina's plans for my house, about Sunset Manor, and about my blood pressure that spikes every time they visit. Have you discussed with them how frustrating this is for you? Bertram asked. I've tried. They think I'm just stubborn and don't know what's best for me. Bertram tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. If you ever need legal advice, Violet, I'm always available, free of charge. I don't think it'll come to litigation, I smiled. Lawyers aren't just for court, Bertram said seriously. Sometimes it's just important to know your rights. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. I thought about Bertram's proposal, about Dr. Reed's words, about my son and daughter-in-law's upcoming visit. Something told me that this visit would be a turning point. Lance and Nina arrived Saturday afternoon around 3 o'clock. I made lunch, but they declined, citing that they had already eaten on the road. Lance brought his briefcase with his papers. Mom, we found a great deal, he began, laying out some papers on the kitchen table. A 1-bedroom apartment at the Cherry Orchard, a senior complex near Sunset Manor. There's 24-hour medical care, social activities, 3 meals a day, and most importantly, no housekeeping. How much does it cost? I asked. Here we wanted to propose a solution, Nina intervened. If you register the house with us, we will pay for the first 3 years of living there, and then we can use your pension and Social Security benefits. And if I live longer than 3 years? I was looking right at Nina. Well, we can always help. She looked away. Or we'll have to save a little money. So I give you a house worth about $300,000, and in exchange you pay the rent for 3 years? I did the math in my head. How much is the rent per month? $2,000, Lance answered. But it's all inclusive: food, utilities, medical care. Even at my most generous estimate, they were offering me $72,000 for a house that cost 4 times that much. What if I turned it down? Lance and Nina exchanged glances. Mom, be reasonable, Lance said with a note of impatience. You can't live here forever. The house needs maintenance, and your health isn't getting any better. What are you going to do when you can't climb the stairs by yourself? I'll sleep in the guest bedroom on the first floor, I answered calmly. What if you fall? Or there's a fire? Who will help you? It was the same conversation I'd had last time, and the time before that, and the time before that. I could feel the throbbing in my temples. I need to think, I said, getting up from the table. I'm sorry. I need to lie down. I have a headache. Sure, Mom. Lance nodded. Get some rest. We'll look around the house in the meantime, assessing what needs to be repaired before we sell. I went up to my bedroom and took a blood pressure pill. My head really hurt, but I couldn't afford to pass out right now. I could hear them walking around the house, opening cabinets, discussing things. I needed to know what they were really talking about when they thought I couldn't hear them. My bedroom has a small walk-in closet connected to the master bathroom, and the bathroom has a vent that goes out into the second-floor hallway. Hugh always complained that you could hear everything going on in the house through it. I never thought I'd be grateful for that design flaw. I walked quietly into the bathroom and listened. Lance and Nina's voices were muffled but intelligible. I can see why she's so stubborn, Nina said. The house is in terrible shape. I doubt we'll get more than $250,000 for it. $250,000 is still not bad, Lance said. Enough for a down payment on a bigger house. Ethan would need his own room when he got older. What about the money for the cherry orchard? Nina sounded annoyed. We can't afford both a new house and her living expenses. I think Sunset Manor is a more reasonable option. The basic package there is only $1,200 a month. That's enough for her pension and insurance. There are 4 people in a room at Sunset Manor, Nina objected. She'll never take it. She'll have to take it when she realizes there are no other options. Lance's voice sounded cold, almost cruel. She wasn't old enough to be picky. Most old people in her position would be happy to have a roof over their heads. If only she'd signed the house over to us a few years ago, like we suggested, Nina sighed. Then we could have sold it and not had to babysit her. She's always been stubborn, Lance said with a chuckle. Remember when she refused to sell my father's stamp collection? There were some rare pieces that would be worth a fortune now. What happened to them? I don't know, probably still in the house somewhere. I'll have to look for them before I sell them. I don't want her giving them away to some charity store for nothing. They went down to the first floor and their voices became unintelligible. I stood leaning against the bathroom wall, feeling the ground go out from under my feet. My legs were shaking and a heaviness was building in my chest. My son and his wife were discussing me as a burden to be gotten rid of at minimal cost. They were planning my life, my old age, and my possessions without even trying to hide their disdain. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the bed. My hands were shaking so badly that I could hardly pour water from the carafe on the bedside table. Dark spots swam before my eyes. I tried to get up to go to the medicine cabinet, but my legs wouldn't listen. The last thing I remember was the room spinning around me, and I started to fall. I woke up in the hospital. White walls, the smell of antiseptic, the squeak of medical equipment. I immediately realized where I was. Lance was sitting next to the bed, staring at his phone. What's wrong? My voice was hoarse, like I'd been screaming for a long time. Lance flinched and looked up. Mom, you're awake! He looked worried, but I couldn't tell if he was sincere or not. You had a hypertensive crisis. We found you unconscious on the bedroom floor. The ambulance brought you here. How long ago? Yesterday afternoon. It's Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. I've been unconscious for almost 24 hours. No wonder my body ached and my head felt like cast iron. Where's Nina? She went to get coffee, Lance took my hand. We were so scared, Mom. The doctor said that if we hadn't found you in time. He didn't finish the sentence, but I realized I could have died, or paralyzed from a stroke. I guess that was reflected on my face because Lance squeezed my hand tighter. It's gonna be okay, Mom. We'll take care of you. How they were going to take care of me, I'd already heard. 4 people in a room at Sunset Manor. I carefully released my hand. I need to talk to the doctor. Of course, Lance nodded. I'll get him. A few minutes later, Dr. Reed entered the room. When he saw me awake, he smiled. Welcome back, Violet. You gave us quite a scare. How serious is it? I asked. Dr. Reed looked at Lance. Could you give us a moment? I need to talk to your mom about her condition. Lance reluctantly left the room. Dr. Reed sat down in the chair next to my bed. Violet, you've had a hypertensive crisis. Your blood pressure's up to 230 over 120. That's a lethal level. You could have had a stroke or a heart attack, but you didn't? Yes, we were able to stabilize you, but I must warn you, the next one could be fatal. I nodded. Somehow this news didn't make me afraid, only fatigue and a strange relief. Now I had an irrefutable medical argument. What should I do? We'll adjust your medication regimen. But most importantly, you need to avoid stress. No stress at all. No confrontations, no nervous breakdowns. Your cardiovascular system is extremely vulnerable right now. Dr. Reed looked at me carefully. Violet, I remember our last conversation about your son and daughter-in-law. I don't want to pry into your family matters, but as a doctor, I have to tell you that if contact with them is causing this reaction, you need to minimize that contact, at least for the duration of your recovery. They want me to move into a nursing home, I said quietly. They're planning to sell my house. Dr. Reed frowned. Moving and adjusting to a new place is stressful too. Significant stress. In your current condition, I wouldn't recommend such a drastic change. Can you write that in the medical report? Of course, he nodded. I will indicate that you are contraindicated from stressful situations, including moving, for at least 3 to 6 months. After Dr. Reed left, I lay staring at the ceiling. Scraps of an overheard conversation kept running through my mind. Babysitting her? Not at the age to be picky. Old men in her position. Each phrase was like a stabbing blow. All my life I had tried to be a good mother, to support my son, to help him, and now I was just a burden for him to get rid of at the lowest possible cost. Lance and Nina came back into the room. They both looked worried, but I could see right through them now. It wasn't me they were worried about. It was my house and the possible cost of my upkeep. What did the doctor say? Lance asked. That I need to avoid stress, I answered. He thinks that moving in the next few months could be hazardous to my health. Lance and Nina looked at each other. But Mom, we've already organized everything, Lance began. There's a vacant apartment at the Cherry Orchard and we've put down a deposit. Dr. Reed will write a medical report, I interrupted him. If you insist on moving against the doctor's advice and something happens to me, it will be on your conscience. Nina pressed her lips together. We only want what's best for us, Violet. What's best for whom? I asked bluntly. There was a heavy silence in the room. I could see Lance struggling with irritation, Nina trying to think of a new argument. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt clarity and determination. When do I get discharged? I asked, breaking the silence. The doctor said they'd keep you for a couple more days for observation, Lance said. Don't worry, we'll make arrangements. I'll take a week off to help you move when you're better. No need. I shook my head. Miriam can look after me for a while. She lives across the street. Miriam? Lance frowned. That old lady. Old lady with the pug? Mom, she can barely walk. She walks just fine, I countered. And her grandchildren come over often to help around the house, unlike some people. I didn't mean to be sarcastic, but the words just came out. Lance looked like I'd slapped him. We live 6 hours away, Mom, and we have a job, Ethan. I understand, I interrupted him. And I don't blame you. I just need to think about my health right now. Dr. Reed says I need to be calm and stress-free. So let's put off any talk of moving for at least 3 months. Lance wanted to object, but Nina put her hand on his shoulder, stopping him. Of course, Violet, she said with a strained smile. Your health comes first. We'll wait until you're better. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't going to wait. They're going to come back to this conversation as soon as I get out of the hospital. They're going to push, they're going to persuade, they're going to manipulate. And with every visit, every call, my blood pressure will rise and my health will deteriorate. Dr. Reed was right. I needed to make a change for my own survival. And it wasn't just about moving or a house. It was the relationship itself which was slowly killing me. At that moment, lying in a hospital bed under the beeping of monitors, I realized I couldn't and didn't want to live like this anymore. I am 77 years old, and who knows how long I have left. I didn't want to spend the rest of my days feeling like a burden to the people who should have been closest to me. Something had to change. And I was beginning to realize that something was myself. The 2 days in the hospital dragged on endlessly. I looked out the window at the hospital parking lot where people came and went, some with flowers, some with balloons, some with worry on their faces. The nurses checked my blood pressure every 4 hours. By the evening of the second day, Dr. Reed said my condition had stabilized, and if the night passed without complications, I would be discharged in the morning. Lance and Nina came both days. They sat next to my bed, talking about the weather, about work, about Ethan's school, about everything but home and moving. But I felt like it was the calm before the storm. They were biding their time, waiting for me to get strong enough to get back on track. On Wednesday morning, just as the nurse brought in my discharge papers, Lance and Nina walked into the room. Both were dressed more formally than the previous days. Lance carried a leather briefcase. "Oh, good morning, Mom." He kissed my cheek. "How are you feeling?" "Better," I replied. "Dr. Reed says I can go home today." "That's great news," Nina smiled. "We've just arranged for a nurse to come and see you for the first time." "Why?" I was surprised. "I'll be fine on my own." "Mom, Youve just had a hypertensive crisis," Lance said, as if he were explaining something to a child. "You need supervision." I didn't argue. There was no point. I had a plan of my own, and I needed time and leeway to carry it out. "Okay," I said, "if you think it's the right thing to do." Lance and Nina exchanged surprised looks. Apparently, they'd expected resistance. "Mom, while we're on the subject of leaving," Lance set his briefcase on the nightstand and opened it. "There's something else we wanted to discuss." He pulled out a file folder. "Nina and I have given your situation a lot of thought, and we've come to the conclusion that the best solution is to transfer the house to Nina while you," he hesitated, choosing words, "while you're still able to make legally significant decisions." "You mean while I'm sane?" I raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly." Lance was embarrassed. "It's just that, given your age and health, we're worried about your future, Violet," Nina interjected. "If something happens to you, Lance will inherit the house, but that's a long and expensive process. If we deed the house now, it'll save everyone a lot of hassle." "And what do I get in return?" I asked you straight up. "Mom," Lance looked insulted, "it's not like we're offering a deal. We're offering a way to secure your future. Sure, you can live in the house as long as you want. What if I don't want to? If I decide to move? Then we'll sell the house and use the money to pay for you to live wherever you want," Lance replied. "The cherry orchard, for example. For the rest of your life?" Lance and Nina looked at each other again. "Well, it depends on the value of the place and the selling price of the house," Nina replied evasively. "But we'll always help if you need anything." I looked at my son and his wife and saw right through them. They had already mentally spent the money from the sale of my house. "We'll help if we need anything," in their language, meant give the minimum so we don't feel like bad people. "Let me see the paperwork." I held out my hand. Lance handed me a folder. Inside was the deed of gift of my house to Nina Thorpe. It was legally correct. They'd even included a clause for me to live in the house for life. But there was no mention of any financial obligations should I move out. No guarantee that the money from the sale of the house would be used to provide for my old age and not for a new house for them or college for Ethan. "I need to think about it," I said, closing the folder. "This is a big decision." "Of course, Mom," Lance nodded, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. "We understand, but don't drag it out too long. Now is a good time to sell real estate in Canyon Lake." "So you plan to sell the house right away?" I couldn't hide my surprise. What about my right of occupancy? Well, given your condition, Nina tried to speak softly, it might make sense to consider professional care options. A cherry orchard or something like that. I looked at them and didn't recognize them. Was that my son? That little boy that Hugh and I loved so much? Who cried when he broke his knees and came to me for comfort? Who drew me Mother's Day cards and told me I was the best mom in the world? I can't make a decision right now, I said, feeling my head start to hurt. I need to consult with someone. A lawyer, for example. A lawyer? Lance frowned. Why? The paperwork's in order. It's standard practice, Lance. Independent legal advice and real estate foreclosures. You don't trust us? Lance was starting to get annoyed. It's not about trust, I tried to say calmly. I just want to make sure I understand the implications. What consequences? Lance raised his voice. We're offering you safety and care. What's not to understand? For example, what happens if Nina decides to sell the house? Or if you two get divorced? Or if... Mom! Lance was almost screaming. We're trying to help you. And you're trying to come up with some unbelievable scenario. Lance, let's not yell. Violet just had a crisis. She shouldn't be freaking out. But Lance couldn't stop now. All your life, he paced the room, waving his arms. All your life you've been in control. Even after my father died, you wouldn't let me take his things. His collections, his tools. Everything had to stay the way you wanted it. It was our things. I felt my blood pressure rising. And I didn't forbid you to take them. I only asked you not to sell the stamp collection because it meant something to your father. Enough. Lance turned to me. Enough of these sentimental stories. My father died 15 years ago. And you're still clinging to these things, to this house, like they're more important than living people. What living people, Lance? I looked him right in the eye. You, your family, who come once a year for a couple days and talk about getting rid of me and my property? There was silence. Lance looked at me as if I'd slapped him. Nina turned pale. So that's what you think of us? Lance's voice became low and cold. That we want to get rid of you. Didn't we? I felt tears come to my eyes, but I held back. Aren't you planning to send me to a nursing home, sell my house, and use the money for your own needs? We want professionals to take care of you. Lance raised his voice again. Because we can't quit our jobs and move to this shithole to take care of you? I'm not asking you to do that, I replied. I'm just asking you to leave me alone, to let me live in my house the way I want to. Until the next attack? Until you have a stroke? Until you break your femoral neck falling down the stairs and lie on the floor for hours until someone finds you? I saw real fear in my son's eyes. He was truly afraid for me. But even more than that, he was afraid of the responsibility. Afraid that one day he would have to leave everything behind and rush to Canyon Lake to take care of his sick mother. And that fear hardened him, made him cold and calculating. Give me a week, I said at last. A week to think it over and consult a lawyer. In a week, I'll give you an answer. A week? Lance shook his head. Mom, we don't have a week. We have to go back to California. I have work, Nina has work, Ethan has school. Then leave the documents, I pointed to the folder. I'll review them, consult with a lawyer, and call you. And mail the signed documents? Lance sounded distrustful. If I decide to sign, yes. Lance stared at me for a long moment as if trying to figure out if I was deceiving him or not. Okay, he said finally. A week. But no more than that, Mom. We need to get this thing done by the end of the month. What's the rush? I asked. Lance and Nina exchanged glances again. We've been offered a lot in a new development, Lance said, at a very good price. But it's a limited time offer. So that was the point. They were already planning to use the money from the sale of my house to build their own. I felt a wave of anger rising inside, but I suppressed it. Now was not the time for emotion. This was a time for cold calculation. I understand, I said. A week. I promise I'll make a decision in that time. And you'll seriously consider our offer? Lance insisted. Without all this talk of lawyers and what-ifs? I looked at my son and saw a stranger in front of me, a man willing to send his own mother to a nursing home to build himself a new home. And in that moment, something inside of me broke completely. The last thread that bound us together as mother and son. Yes, Lance, I lied, looking him straight in the eye. I'll seriously consider your offer. Lance visibly relaxed. He thought he'd won. Thanks, Mom. You won't regret it. We'll find you a better place at the cherry orchard. Now help me pack, I said. I want to go home soon. At home, everything looked the same, but it felt different. It was as if the house didn't belong to me anymore, like I was a guest in my own home. Lance and Nina helped me get settled, laid out the groceries they'd bought on the way home from the hospital, and reminded me about the nurse who was due the next day. We would have stayed a couple more days, Mom, Lance said before we left, but we really need to get back. I'll call you tomorrow to see how you're doing. Of course, I smiled. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. As their car disappeared around the corner, I breathed a sigh of relief. Alone at last. Finally able to think and act. I called Bertram immediately. Violet! His voice sounded concerned. Miriam said you were in the hospital. How are you? I'm home. Bertram, I need your help. Legal help. It's urgent and, confidential. Of course, he answered without hesitation. I can be there in an hour. Exactly an hour later, Bertram Price was sitting in my living room scrutinizing the documents Lance and Nina had left behind. His face grew darker with each page he read. Violet, he said, this deed of gift is legally sound, but it completely removes your control over your property. Yes, there's a clause that says you have the right to live here for life, but it's laced with terms that your sister-in-law can actually evict you at any time if she claims you violated any of them. Such as? For example, if you create conditions that make cohabitation impossible, or if your health condition requires specialized care. Those are very vague terms that can be interpreted any way you want. I nodded. This was exactly what I was afraid of. What should I do, Bertram? He took off his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief, as he always did when he was thinking deeply. It depends on what you want. If you want to keep the house, I can help you draw up a counteroffer with clearer terms. If you want to sell the house and use the money to provide for your old age, I can help with that. I take a deep breath. I want to disappear. Bertram looked at me in surprise. Disappear? Sell the house, take the money, and start a new life somewhere where I won't be found, where I won't feel like a burden, where I wouldn't be afraid that every phone call from my son would give me a seizure. Bertram was silent for a long time, pondering my words. This is a big decision, Violet. Are you sure? I've never been so sure in my life, I said. Every time I see them or talk to them, my blood pressure skyrockets. Dr. Reed said the next attack could be fatal. I have to choose between my relationship with my son and my own life. And I'm choosing life. Bertram nodded. I understand, and I'll help you if that's what you really want. But we need to move quickly and carefully. Do you have a buyer for the house? I wondered. Who would buy a house quickly without any questions or formalities? And then it hit me. Maybe there is. My former co-worker, Noah Harper. He always said he loved the house and would buy it if I ever decided to sell. He's a real estate investor. Great. Bertram pulled out a notebook and started writing things down. Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll make sure your Noah Harper is still interested and has the funds. Then we'll finalize the deal as quickly as possible. We'll transfer the money to a new account at another bank, preferably in another state. Then we'll find you a place to rent, also in another state. And finally, we'll help you move. How fast can we do all this? If your buyer agrees and has the cash, the deal can be done in 2 to 3 days. Another day to open an account. Another 2 to 3 days to find a place to live and organize the move. All in all, a week, maybe a little more. Exactly the amount of time I bargained for from Lance. It was a sign. Let's do it, I said firmly. The next few days passed like a blur. Noah Harper didn't just agree to buy the house. He was thrilled with the offer, named a price that was even above market value. I've always dreamed of this house, Violet. It will fit perfectly into my investment portfolio. Bertram helped with all the paperwork. We opened a new bank account in Arizona. We found a small but cozy apartment to rent in Phoenix. Bertram even helped organize the transportation of my personal belongings. Not all of them, just the essentials and valuables. I decided to keep the rest. Let Lance and Nina deal with the junk, as they called it. The day before I left, I wrote a short note. Lance and Nina, I've made a decision. The house is sold. I've taken the money. Don't come looking for me. I'll be fine. Mom. Those were the last words I wanted to say to my son and his wife. No explanation, no apology. Just the fact of the matter. Early Wednesday morning, exactly 1 week after my discharge from the hospital, Bertram arrived to drive me to the airport. I took one last look around the house I'd lived in for 32 years. The walls that held memories of Hugh, of our life together, of the rare happy moments with Lance. It was sad to leave, but at the same time I felt strangely relieved, like I was letting go of a heavy weight that was dragging me down. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Bertram asked when we were at the door. "Absolutely," I answered. "Thank you for everything, Bertram." "You're welcome," he smiled. "Just promise me you'll let me know when you get settled in." "I will." I left the note on the kitchen table, locked the door, and gave the keys to Bertram. He was supposed to give them to Noah after the deal was done. We drove away. I didn't look back. 3 days later on Saturday, Lance and Nina arrived in Canyon Lake as promised. They expected to see me at home, ready to sign the gift papers. Instead, they found a note on the table and an empty house. A house that no longer belonged to them. Bertram told me about it when he called that evening. "They were furious, Violet," he said. "Lance was screaming that he'd sue, that he'd declare you incompetent, that it wasn't fair." Nina cried. "But legally, there's nothing they can do. The house was yours, and you had every right to sell it. The money was yours, too. And since you're a capable adult, you have the right to live anywhere and not report your whereabouts if you don't want to." "Thank you, Bertram," I said. "I know what I did was cruel, but it was necessary." "You did what you had to do to protect yourself," he replied. "There's nothing cruel about it. What was cruel was the way they treated you." After that conversation, I felt the last weight fall from my shoulders. I was free. Free from toxic relationships, from manipulation, from constant stress and pressure. Free to start a new chapter of my life. Perhaps the last, but my own. Sitting on the balcony of my new apartment in Phoenix, overlooking the mountains in the distance, I took my blood pressure for the first time in a long time. 130/80. Almost perfect for my age. And though my heart still ached from the separation from my only son, I knew I'd done the right thing. Sometimes you have to let go of the past in order to have a future, even if that past is your own family. Arizona greeted me with a heat wave not at all unlike the temperate climate of Canyon Lake. Dry, scalding air that took my breath away when I first stepped out of the airport. Phoenix, a city in the middle of the desert, a mirage city built where, by the laws of nature, there should be no human habitation. Somehow it reminded me of my new life. Unnatural, created against all odds, but still existing. My apartment was in a small senior citizen complex called Sunset Vista. The irony didn't escape me. I had escaped Sunset Manor only to move into Sunset Vista. But unlike the nursing home Lance and Nina had planned for me, here I had complete independence. A separate one-bedroom apartment with a living room, kitchen, and a small balcony overlooking the Superstition Mountains in the distance. The complex offered some amenities: a swimming pool, a common living room where activities were held for residents, a small library. But no one was watching me, telling me when to eat, when to sleep, who to socialize with. The first few days were the hardest. I would wake up in an unfamiliar room, with an unfamiliar view out the window, and for a few seconds I would panic, not realizing where I was. Then I remembered I'd run away. From my son, from my daughter-in-law, from the house that had been mine for 32 years, from all my old life. At such moments, doubts overwhelmed me. Had I done the right thing? Was my decision too hasty? Should I have tried again to explain to Lance and Nina how I felt? Give them another chance? But then I thought back to their conversation I'd overheard in my house. Babysitting her, not at the age to be picky, and my blood pressure, which rose to dangerous levels every time they visited. No, I did the right thing. It was a matter of survival. Bertram called me every day for the first week to make sure I was okay. It was from him that I found out Lance had started the search. "He came to my office," Bertram told me, "demanded to know where you were, threatened to sue me if I didn't come forward." "And what did you say?" I asked, feeling my pulse racing. "I told him the truth, that I didn't know exactly where you were, that you'd asked me to help you sell the house, and then you'd left without giving me your address. It was a half-truth. Bertram knew I was in Phoenix, but he didn't know my exact address. We'd made that arrangement for his own safety, so he could honestly say he didn't know exactly where I lived. He didn't believe me, Bertram continued. He said I was your accomplice, that I helped you escape and hide the money, threatened to report me to the police. Oh my God, I felt nausea rising in my throat. Was he really that angry? Violet, Bertram's voice became serious. I don't think this is about anger. It's about the money. He was counting on that $350,000 from the sale of the house. Probably spent it mentally by now. And now he has to explain to Nina why their plans for a new house will have to be postponed. I sighed. Bertram was right, as always. Lance wasn't looking for me. He was looking for money. Had he gone to the police? I asked. Yes, filed a missing persons report. But the police quickly closed the case when I showed them your note and the deed to the house. You're an adult of legal capacity, Violet. You have the right to disappear if you want to. That was comforting, but not completely. I knew Lance wouldn't give up so easily. Not with that much money at stake. He might try to have me declared incompetent, I said, because of the seizure and the hospital stay. He's already trying, Bertram said. He's gone to a lawyer who specializes in guardianship of the elderly, but he has little chance of success. Dr. Reed refuses to testify that you're incapacitated. On the contrary, he claims you were fully conscious and lucid when you left the hospital. In addition, the sale of the house itself shows that you acted rationally. You sold it at market value. You did all the paperwork correctly. That doesn't sound like someone with cognitive impairment. I was relieved. At least I was safe in that regard. Thank you for everything, Bertram. I don't know what I would have done without your help. You're welcome, Violet. Just be careful. Don't use any credit cards issued before you left. Don't call from your old number. And please let me know regularly that you're okay. I promised and tried to follow his advice. I bought a new cell phone with a new number. I opened a local bank account and transferred some of the money from the Arizona account. I tried not to leave any trace that could lead Lance to me. But even with those precautions, the first month was filled with fear. Every time I left the apartment, I looked around nervously, expecting to see the familiar figure of my son. Every time the phone rang from an unfamiliar number, my heart sank into my heels. Every night I had nightmares of Lance finding me and forcibly taking me to Sunset Manor. I lay awake at night listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my new home. I missed my home, my garden of roses and petunias, the neighbors I had known for decades. Sometimes she cried, remembering Lance as a little boy, as he had been before life and ambition had made him cold and calculating. In such moments, the doubts returned with renewed vigor. I learned from Bertram that Lance hadn't given up trying to find me. He hired a private investigator who interviewed neighbors, checked airline records, tried to track down withdrawals from my accounts. He even contacted the FBI, claiming I might have been kidnapped for extortion. But the FBI, as well as the local police, were quickly convinced that I left voluntarily. He's obsessed, Bertram said in one of our conversations. It's not just about money anymore. It's about control. He can't bear the thought of you breaking free of his influence. Or his reputation, I added. How does it look from the outside? A son whose elderly mother ran away, abandoning her house and all her possessions to avoid dealing with him. Probably both, agreed Bertram. In any case, be careful. And I was. So much so that for the first few weeks I hardly left the apartment except for groceries. Ordered everything I needed online. Avoided common activities in the complex. Refused to get to know her neighbors. But this life quickly became depressing. I escaped from one prison only to create another. This time out of my own fear. It wasn't right. It wasn't what I'd given up everything for. One day, exactly 1 month after arriving in Phoenix, I decided it was time for a change. Fear couldn't continue to control my life. I took my blood pressure, 120/75, better than it had been in years. The headache that had been my constant companion in Canyon Lake was almost gone. Physically, I felt better than I had in a long time. It was time to take care of my mental state as well. I went down to the common living room of the complex where the coffee and conversation event was scheduled to take place. It was an informal gathering of residents to get to know each other, socialize, discuss books, movies, and news. About 10 people had already gathered in the living room, mostly women my age or slightly younger, and a couple of men. They were sitting in small groups, talking, laughing. I felt awkward like a teenager at her first party. Maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe we should go back to the apartment. You must be new, I heard a voice say and turned around. Standing in front of me was a tall, slender woman with close-cropped gray hair and bright blue eyes. I'm Eleanor Prescott. I live in apartment 312. Violet Thorpe. I introduced myself, extending my hand. Apartment 205. Nice to meet you, Violet. Have you moved in recently? I haven't seen you at any of our events before. About a month ago, I said. From California. That was a little lie I'd made up before I arrived. California is a big state, and it's easier to get lost there. Besides, if Lance somehow got on my trail, he'd be looking in Arizona first, not thinking I'd moved to the same state where he lived. I'm from California, too. Eleanor perked up. San Diego. Where are you from? A small town near Sacramento, I continued. You probably don't know it. Probably not, Eleanor agreed. Come on, I'll introduce you to the others. We're a friendly bunch, you'll like it. She took me by the arm and led me to a group of women sitting by the window. I felt awkward, but I forced myself to smile and keep the conversation going. Gradually, the tension began to ease. These people didn't know me, didn't know my past, had no expectations. I could be anyone I wanted to be, tell them anything about my life. It was a strange but pleasant feeling of freedom. After that first visit to the Common Lounge, I became a regular participant in the complex's activities. Coffee meetings on Wednesdays, book club on Fridays, movie nights on Saturdays. Gradually, I began to get to know my neighbors and they got to know me, or rather the version of me I presented to them. Eleanor became my first real friend in Phoenix. A former English teacher, she was sharp-tongued, well-read, and unexpectedly progressive for her age. She had been widowed 10 years ago and had been, as she put it, enjoying freedom ever since. You know, Violet, she said to me one day as we sat by the pool, I loved my husband Henry, I really did. But after he died, I realized that I'd spent my whole life fitting in with him. His tastes, his interests, his schedule. It wasn't until I was alone that I began to realize who I really was. I nodded. It was so much like my relationship with Hugh, and then with Lance. Always adjusting, always giving in, always putting other people's needs before my own. How did you deal with the loneliness? I asked. It was a question that had plagued me since arriving in Phoenix. I won't lie, the first year was hard, Eleanor answered. I was used to having someone else in the house. I was used to cooking for two, doing laundry for two, planning for two. But then I started to discover the joys of being alone. You can eat what you want when you want, watching what you like rather than compromising, sleeping in the middle of the bed. She laughed. It sounds selfish, but at our age we've earned the right to be a little selfish, don't you think? I've never thought of it that way. All my life I've put others first. First my parents, then Hugh, then Lance. The idea that it was my turn, that I'd earned the right to put myself first, was new and exciting. Besides, Eleanor continued, loneliness and solitude are different things. Solitude is when you are alone with yourself by choice. Solitude is when you feel cut off from other people, even if they are around. I prefer solitude, but I avoid loneliness. Those words seared into my soul. Wasn't that what my old life was all about? The loneliness among a family that saw me only as a source of inheritance? Gradually, with the help of Eleanor and other new acquaintances, I began to create a new life for myself in Phoenix. Signed up for painting classes at the local senior center. I'd always wanted to learn to paint, but never had the time. I volunteered at the public library, shelving books, helping with children's programs. I even started to learn how to use a computer at digital literacy courses, something I was afraid of before. Every day, the fear of Lance finding me receded further. I looked around less and less when I left the house. I didn't flinch as much when the phone rang. The nightmares had almost stopped. I started to feel safe. But sometimes, especially at night, I still had doubts. Was I right to cut all ties with my son? Was my decision too drastic? Maybe I should have tried to explain to him again how his words and actions were affecting me. At times like this, I pulled out the medical records I'd brought with me from Canyon Lake. I flipped through them, looked at my blood pressure graphs before and after Lance's visits, saw a clear correlation. Every visit from him, every conversation about the nursing home or rewriting the house caused her blood pressure to spike. And now, in Phoenix, away from him, my blood pressure had stabilized at a level it hadn't been at in years. It was physical, measurable proof that I had done the right thing. Our relationship was literally killing me. And no matter how hard I felt about breaking up with my only son, I knew I had done what I had to do to survive. At the same time, I began to realize that my new life was giving me opportunities I had never even dreamed of. Freedom to be myself, to try new things, to meet new people without the weight of past expectations and obligations. It was scary but exciting at the same time. 3 months after arriving in Phoenix, I sent Bertram an email. Dear Bertram, I hope you are doing well. Mine is better than it has been in a long time. My blood pressure has normalized, my headaches are almost gone. I've made new friends, taken up painting, can you imagine, at my age, and volunteered at the library. Sometimes I still miss home, my garden, familiar places. Sometimes I feel guilty about what I did to Lance, but then I remember that I literally saved my life, and those feelings recede. How's Lance? Is he still looking for me, or has he come to terms with it? Yours, Violet. The reply came the next day. Dear Violet, I'm so glad to hear you're okay. Painting is wonderful, always wanted to learn, but my hands are growing out of the wrong place. As for Lance, he seems to have calmed down a bit. At least he's not coming to my office threatening me anymore. But the private investigator's still on the job. He's been interviewing bank employees recently, trying to figure out where the money from the house sale went. So be careful with your finances. The rest of Canyon Lake is the same. Miriam is asking about you, but as we agreed, I say we just text occasionally and you're fine. Take care of yourself, Bertram. Bertram's letter brought me back to reality. Lance was still looking for me, or more specifically, the money from the sale of the house. I needed to remain cautious, but now the thought didn't evoke the same terror. I knew I could protect myself. I knew that here in Phoenix I had new friends, a new life, a new me. The day after I received the letter from Bertram, I went to my painting class with a special mood. We were painting a landscape, the Superstition Mountains at sunset, the same ones that were visible from my balcony. I was mixing orange and magenta for the sky, adding blue shadows to the silhouettes of the mountains. For the first time, I didn't think about technique. I didn't worry that I was doing something wrong. I didn't compare my work with other students' work. I just enjoyed the process, the color, the moment. Very good, Violet, the instructor said as she walked by. You're making great progress. I smiled. Maybe it wasn't so much about my artistic skills as it was that I was finally starting to see the beauty in the world around me. Beauty that had always been there, but that I hadn't noticed. Too busy worrying, fearing, trying to live up to other people's expectations. Coming home after class, I felt truly alive for the first time in a long time. Not just existing, not just surviving, but alive with desires, interests, joys, interests. And while part of me was still grieving the lost relationship with my son, another part of me was beginning to realize that sometimes you have to let go of one thing to gain another. Sometimes you have to lose what you thought defined you to find who you really are. The year flew by. Every day in Phoenix was filled with new discoveries, new acquaintances, new experiences. A life that seemed over at 77 suddenly got a second wind at 78. My apartment in Sunset Vista became a home. I repainted the walls mint green, a color I'd always liked, but which Hugh considered sickly. I put up indoor plants, succulents and cacti, perfect for the Arizona climate. I hung my own paintings on the walls, imperfect, naive, but filled with sincere emotion. I made new friends. Eleanor became my closest friend. We went to senior yoga classes together, attended art exhibits, sometimes went to the movies. There was Joseph, a 72-year-old former history professor with whom we could spend hours discussing books in our book club, and Sylvia and Frank, a married couple who lived next door, who often invited me over for dinner. But the biggest change in my life was community service. 6 months after arriving in Phoenix, I began volunteering at the local Golden Years Senior Center. At first, I helped with administrative work, answering phones, filling out forms, making schedules. But gradually, I got involved in more active work. I started leading a painting class for beginners, older people like me who had always wanted to paint, but had never found the time or courage to try. It was incredibly inspiring to see my students' faces light up when they created something with their own hands, how proud they were of their work, how they found a new purpose in life. My health has improved dramatically. My blood pressure has stabilized so much that Dr. Heimish, my new doctor in Phoenix, has even reduced my medication dosage. The headaches that had been my constant companions in Canyon Lake were now rare and much less intense. I even started sleeping better, without the pills I had been taking for years. Violet, I'm impressed with your progress, Dr. Heimish said at my last checkup. For someone your age, you're in exceptional shape. Whatever you do, keep doing it. I smiled but didn't explain what exactly I was doing. That my good shape wasn't the result of diet or exercise, but the absence of a toxic relationship that was slowly killing me. Of course, not everything was perfect. Sometimes I still woke up in the middle of the night with a heaviness in my chest, thinking about Lance, about the boy I'd given birth to, raised, loved more than anything in the world. The man he'd become, cold, calculating, seeing me only as a burden and a source of inheritance. At such moments, the doubts returned. Had I done the right thing by running away? Was my decision too radical? But then I remembered my blood pressure, my headaches, my constant stress and fear. I thought back to what Dr. Reed had said about how the next attack could be fatal. And I realized I had no choice. It was a matter of survival. I kept in touch with Bertram through email. He was my only link to my old life, to Canyon Lake. From him, I'd get updates on Lance. At first, Lance was obsessed with finding me, hired a private investigator, contacted the police, even tried to trace money transfers through banks. But gradually, his fervor waned. Apparently, he realized I wasn't coming back and resigned himself to losing the money from the sale of the house. Or he found another way to finance his plans. He came to Canyon Lake last week, Bertram wrote in one of his letters. Stopped by my office. But this time without yelling or threatening, asked if I'd heard from you. I told him I hadn't. He seemed, resigned. Said if you ever wanted to get in touch with him, you'd know how to find him. Those words hit something deep inside me. Part of me wanted to write to Lance, explain my actions, maybe even try to patch things up but on new terms, respecting my autonomy. But the other part realized that it was dangerous, that I risked falling back into the same toxic situation I had run away from. In the end, I didn't write or call. I figured if fate wanted to bring us back together, it would find a way. And amazingly enough, it did. It was exactly 1 year and 2 months after I disappeared from Canyon Lake. I decided to visit Miriam, an old friend of mine who had moved in with her daughter in San Diego after breaking her femoral neck. We kept in touch by phone, and she had invited me to visit on more than one occasion. I had put off the trip for a long time, fearing that I might accidentally reveal my whereabouts to Lance. But finally, I decided. San Diego greeted me with an ocean breeze and bright sunshine. Miriam and her daughter Lauren lived in a cozy house near the beach. We spent 2 wonderful days reminiscing about old times, discussing the news, just enjoying each other's company. Miriam looked well. She had recovered from her fracture, and although still using a cane, was able to get around on her own. On the 3rd day of my visit, Lauren suggested we go to the big Westfield Mall. She needed to buy a gift for her husband, and I wanted to get some new paintbrushes. Miriam decided to stay home. The long walks were still tiring her. We spent about 2 hours at the mall. Lauren found a gift for her husband, expensive cufflinks, and I bought a set of high-quality watercolor brushes. We decided to grab a bite to eat in the food court before heading home. And it was there among the crowd of customers that I saw him. Lance, my son. He was sitting at a table with Nina and Ethan, now an 11-year-old boy who had grown so much in the past year that I barely recognized him. They were eating sushi and talking animatedly about something. My heart sank. Instinctively, I turned away, afraid Lance would recognize me. But then I realized he wouldn't recognize me. I'd changed a lot in a year. I cut my hair short, a practical haircut that, as Eleanor said, took 10 years off me. Dyed my hair, not a radical color, but just added a little red to my gray. I lost weight, not intentionally, just from being more active and eating healthier. Even started dressing differently, brighter, more modern, in a style I would never have dared try in Canyon Lake. Violet, is everything all right? Lauren asked, noticing my confusion. Yeah, it's just, I thought I saw a familiar face, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Here? In San Diego? Who? Nobody important, I said, trying to smile. I was just imagining it. But Lauren saw the direction of my gaze. Those people with the boy? Do you know them? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell the truth that they were my son, his wife, and my grandson, whom I hadn't seen in over a year. But another part of me realized it could be dangerous. Lauren was the daughter of Miriam, a close friend of mine from Canyon Lake. If she found out Lance was here, in the same mall, she might decide I should meet him. She might even approach him herself. No, I lied. It just seemed like it. We sat at a table away from Lance's family. I sat with my back to them so I wouldn't be tempted to keep looking in their direction. But I couldn't help but think about them. What are they doing in San Diego? Vacationing? Or maybe moving here? They looked happy, relaxed. Lance was smiling at Ethan, rubbing his head. Nina was talking emotionally, gesturing with her sushi sticks. Just a normal, happy family, without me. I felt a lump come up in my throat. I suppressed it with an effort of will. Not here, not now. Violet, are you sure you're okay? Lauren asked again. You seem upset. I'm just a little tired, I replied. Let's eat and go home, okay? We ate quickly, and I thought the danger was over when I heard a familiar voice close by. Excuse me, do you have a napkin? I froze. It was Lance. He was standing right by our table, turning to Lauren, not recognizing me, completely unrecognizing his own mother sitting less than a meter away from him. Sure. Lauren handed him a stack of napkins from the table. Thank you, Lance smiled. My son knocked over a soda and we were out of napkins. Kids, Lauren nodded understandingly. How old is he? 11, Lance said proudly. But sometimes he acts like a 5-year-old. They both laughed. I sat with my head down, afraid to look up. What if he recognizes me after all? What would I say? What would I do? But Lance didn't. He picked up his napkins, thanked Lauren again, and walked back to his table. I turned my head cautiously, watching him hand the napkins to Nina, watching them wipe up the spilled soda together, watching Ethan smile embarrassedly. And suddenly the realization hit me, they're fine. They're perfectly fine without me. Maybe even better than they were with me. Without the fighting over my house. Without the tension that has always arisen between us in recent years. Without having to pretend to care for the sake of an inheritance. It was a painful but also strangely liberating realization. It was as if it lifted the last weight of responsibility from me, the last shadow of doubt. They're doing fine, and I'm coping. We're separated, like ships at sea, and we're on our own course. And maybe that's best for everyone. Let's go home, I said to Lauren. I was really tired. I was silent on the way home, absorbed in my thoughts. Lauren must have chalked it up to fatigue. She turned on the radio and focused on the road, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I was pondering the strangeness of fate, about how life sometimes takes unexpected turns. A year ago, I was an exhausted, terrified woman with dangerously high blood pressure, living in constant fear of my own son. Now I was healthy, active, and had found a new meaning to life. All thanks to one radical decision, to choose myself over a toxic relationship. I won't lie, seeing Lance, Nina, and Ethan not being able to talk to them or hug my grandson was painful. It was painful to realize that my own son had passed me by without recognizing me. That to him I might have ceased to exist, become just an unpleasant memory. A story about a crazy old woman who ran away with the money. But the pain was different than before. Not sharp, heart-wrenching pain, but dull, muted like an old scar that ached in the rain. Pain that you can live with. A pain that reminds you that you are still a human being, still capable of feeling. Back at Miriam's house, I excused myself and retired to my room, saying I wanted to rest before dinner. In truth, I needed to be alone, to process what had happened. I sat by the window, looking out at the ocean in the distance, The waves rolled in and out, over and over, in an eternal rhythm that had existed long before me and would exist long after. It was a strangely soothing sight. In that moment, I realized that I didn't regret my decision. Yes, it was radical. Yes, it hurt, both me and probably Lance. But it also saved my life. It allowed me to find new meaning, new joy, new people who valued me for who I was, not as a source of inheritance. My story was not a story with a happy ending in the traditional sense. There was no reconciliation with my son, no family reunion, no tears of joy and hugs. Instead, there was a quiet, calm reassurance that I had done the right thing, that sometimes you need to let people go, even if you love them, if your relationship with them is hurting you, that sometimes the biggest act of self-love is choosing your health, your well-being, your life. The next day, I returned to Phoenix. Miriam noticed the change in my mood but didn't question it. She had always been a tactful friend. She just hugged me goodbye and said, "Come again, Violet. I've missed our conversations so much." "I will," I promised. And this time I really meant it. The fear that Lance might track me through Miriam didn't seem so strong anymore. After yesterday's encounter, I realized he'd probably already accepted my disappearance and stopped looking. Upon my return to Phoenix, I wrote Bertram about what had happened. He replied almost immediately, "Dear Violet, what an amazing coincidence." Or maybe it wasn't a coincidence? Maybe the universe wanted to show you that everything is okay, that you can move on without the weight of the past? Either way, I'm glad you found in this experience a confirmation of your decision and not a reason to have more doubts. You did the right thing, Violet. Don't ever doubt it. Sincerely, Bertram. I smiled as I read his words. Bertram always knew how to find the right words of comfort. But this time they weren't needed. I had indeed found confirmation of my decision. Not just in the fact that Lance and his family seemed happy without me, but in the way I felt after seeing them. I expected that seeing them again would be a traumatizing experience, that it would trigger a new wave of doubts, regrets, maybe even a desire to go back. But instead, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and I could finally see the full picture. We're separated. They're living their lives. I'm living mine. And maybe that's best for everyone. Maybe our relationship was doomed from the moment Lance started seeing me not as a mother, but as a source of inheritance. Perhaps my disappearance wasn't a tragedy, but a necessary severing of a bond that had become toxic for everyone involved. The day after I returned from San Diego, I went to a class at Golden Years. We were working on a new project, a series of self-portraits called Who Am I Now? Each person had to paint themselves not as they were when they were younger, not as others see them, but as they feel themselves to be in the present moment. I stared at the blank canvas for a long time, wondering how to portray myself. A year ago, I probably would have painted a frightened, broken woman cornered by her own family. But now, I started with the eyes. Clear, calm, looking directly at the viewer. Not looking away, not hiding. Then I added wrinkles, not trying to hide them or soften them, but to show them as signs of a life lived, each with its own story. Gray hair with a reddish streak, as a symbol of wisdom mixed with unexpected playfulness. A slight smile on his lips, not a broad, ostentatious one, but calm, confident, knowing. When I finished, the instructor came over to watch. "Very expressive, Violet," she said. "There is so much life in those eyes, so many stories." "Thank you," I said. "There really are a lot of stories in them, some happy, some sad. But they were all mine. And that was the whole point. All of these stories are mine. My life with Hugh, my job, my home in Canyon Lake, my son, my disappearance, my new life in Phoenix. All of these pieces made up me, Violet Thorpe, not just Lance's mother, not just Hugh's widow, but a separate person with her own needs, desires, fears, and joys. And perhaps the most important decision of my life was the one I made a year ago, to choose myself, my health, my life over a toxic relationship, even if that relationship was with my own son. It wasn't an act of selfishness, as it might seem from the outside, but an act of self-preservation. Sometimes you have to let go of some people in order to find others, and find yourself. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sun set behind the Superstition Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the very colors I had so diligently mixed in my paintings. In my hand, I held a glass of wine, a small weakness I allowed myself on occasion, despite Dr. Hamish's warnings. I thought about Lance, about our chance encounter at the mall, how he walked by without recognizing his own mother, about how he and Nina and Ethan looked happy, carefree, and instead of bitterness or resentment, I felt a strange calm. They're okay. I'm fine. We're separated like ships at sea, each sailing our own course. And as I watched the sunset, I realized I had no regrets. Not about my escape, not about breaking up with my son, not about not talking to him at the mall. I did what I had to do to survive. And now, a year later, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Really living, maybe for the first time in years. And that was the whole point.